Right. Good evening. Thank you for being here tonight. To our special guest, Sibongile, nice to see you and thanks for giving up your time. Um, just want to explain to people who might be tuning in and listening to this series that it is a series of interviews with various stakeholders in the environment, water, civil society, social sectors in our country. And there will be a variety of discussions around various topics, um, all centered kind of around the environment. And of course, you cannot, there's such a strong link between the society and the environment. Um, if there's a environmental breakdown or collapse, obviously there's a societal breakdown and collapse. But yeah, tonight our guest is Sibongile Mtungwa from the Women Leadership and Training Program. So we look forward to hearing from you, Sibongile. I thank you for the time. And I want to start by just asking you to just give us a introduction to yourself. You know, where you were born, where you went to school, a little bit about your home, your memories as a young girl growing up in KZN on the border of the Eastern Cape. Um, yeah, so please, thank you.
And greetings to everyone. My name is Sibongile
I
Mtungwa.
can hardly hear you. You will have to speak up.
Okay,
Okay,
how
so,
is it now?
no, it's perfect. Thanks.
Okay, my name is Sibongile Mtungwa. I was born in the area of Sentokau in KwaZulu Natal. I am 46 years old, well, 47 sometime, depend on the ID and when I was born. So the ID says something else, when I was born says something else, the baptismal certificate says something else. So that's me. I am a mother of two, a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old, a boy and a girl. And I'm born out of 9 siblings, and I'm the second born. So it's that whole thing of leadership begins at home, because if you've got 7 siblings after you, um, you just have to be a leader. I'm not sure if my connection is okay.
Yeah, it's fine. Thanks.
Is the okay? Because it says something else on my side. Okay. So I am married and I've got 2 kids, as I've said. And I went to Newtonville Primary School, a primary school in the Crichton area. And oh, by the way, this place is in the Herigwala District Municipality. And my municipality is Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma Municipality. And yes, we border with Eastern Cape because of the river. So the other group is on the other side of the river. We are on the other side of the river. That is Umzimkulu River. And when I think of my memories of as a young person, it's always around the river. It's around the land, and it's around how those have changed and how those have the river and the land have changed and how it has affected me, my household, and uh, the community at large. And I think, in a way, that influenced me a lot on who I am today, because in my area of work, I work with girls from the ages of 8 to 13, 14 to 19 or 20, and those who are beginning to enter tertiary institution. And why that? That comes a long way, of course, because I'm a girl, but also being raised by a family of a grandma, my grandmother being the father, the mother, and everything, and knowing the woman leadership in my household as the very stable leadership I can trust. I can rely on at all times. It never left me. That leadership never abandoned me in my childhood and up until now. I think that influenced me a lot on what I do. But also,
Can I just ask Sibongile? In some of our societies, it's very patriarchal, and I understand from what you say, and also from what I've read about you, is that your grandmother, for example, was a very, very strong woman, which sort of commanded a lot of respect amongst her peers. That's usual in African society. Hey, women are, I know it's patriarchal, but elderly women are still being held in high regard, is it not?
I will say, older women, they've got a character, I think, that allows them to be, they can hold the patriarchal role without, without oppressing you. And of course, because patriarchy is what they were raised under as well, you can see that element in them. However, they are able to, because they have suffered under patriarchy, so then when they are able to discern better, they are able to let you be free from the patriarchal practices. And that is how I can define my grandmother, because she was just that kind of person. She was given to my grandfather when she was in standard, when she was supposed to do standard 4. And then it was decided that she has to go and get married to my to my grandfather, and build that family, of my grandfather. But in herself, she always wanted education. She always tell us, if that decision was not made, she would have been a very important person in society, because she would have acquired education. But also, we saw that she loved education by the way she will deal with our homeworks. All the time will be struggling with maths and things like that. And she will just grab, and this would be high school maths. And she will grab with that, paper and say, what is difficult about this? And she will solve those maths sums for us. And for me, it made me to understand that from what was denied, from her childhood, she wanted us to be free from that, in a way that when I grew up, she said to me, if there's something I want for you, or a husband that I would really want to give you, education is the main husband for if I were to choose for you.
Wow.
However, things changed, over a number of years, because this is part of me. I got abducted several times for marriages and things like that, and it was okay in the community. There was nothing wrong with that. Every girl can be abducted, and it's okay. However, she managed to say, no, that's not right. She came to this family that abducted me, and said, I'm taking my granddaughter home. And everyone was like, what? And then she said, no, she's mine. I'm taking her home. I'm a Christian. I don't do those kind of things. So I'm taking her home. And because of that decision, she was hated a lot, because she did something that was not okay in the community. But at the same time, for me, it gave me permission to say, Sibongile, you can be anything that you want to be. I remember when I was away, running away from these episodes and all these kind of things I was experiencing, she wrote a letter to me wherever I was. She said, Sibongile Mtanami, my granddaughter, I don't know exactly what you're doing and how you are doing this, but if it's going to help you to be free and to get education that you've always wanted, so let it be. So I support you. So yes, I think because of that kind of leadership from my grandmother, I think it has made me to to understand that, that was a gift given to me by my grandmother, but then I have got a responsibility to give it to other young people in my community and beyond. And hence I am doing this kind of work that I'm doing
So
today.
she was obviously a great inspiration to you in her strength. But can I ask you? You said that you were yourself were abducted, and then you mentioned that it sounded as if you said that that is kind of right in the society where you grew up. Where can you explain what? Because to me, an abduction is where where a woman or a man gets taken away from his family or her family, and is kind of missing and being where you have to go and call the police if somebody gets abducted. But it sounds as if it's almost a common thing. Can you explain a little bit how that works?
Okay. Where I am now, I live in Underberg now, which is just 50 kilometers away from Sentokau, so just uphill from Sentokau. But this whole district, if I may say, and I think also across, as you know, that Herigwala extends to Kokstad now. It is culturally right from way back, for many, many years, for many generations since I've been, it's all right to be abducted for marriage by someone you know or by someone you don't know, someone of your age or someone older than you. And you cannot say no to that because it's considered as a very good luck, and your status is better. Your self-esteem lies around that I'm a girl of this family and I'm married to this man, so I am fulfilled as a woman, and whatever I can do after that, it's based on the fact that I'm the lucky girl who got married. So it is okay. And so that is why when I was abducted, there was nothing wrong, but then it was wrong to me because already then I knew that there was something called human rights. And I knew that girls were part of, girls and young women also had rights, because that at that time I have started attending leadership workshops, that are run in my community
Yeah.
by this organization that I work for now, which is Women Leadership and Training Program. At that time, they will be coming from Johannesburg and will be like, what is this? And that for me was a great inspiration to say, women, girls, leadership. So I can be a leader, And then when that happened to me, even though it was fine in the community, but it was not fine to me. And I still don't know why it was not fine to my grandmother, because she's never been into workshops and things like that. I still don't know what gave her the courage to kick that door open, where I was. She kicked the door and she said, "This is my baby. I take her home." I don't know where she came from. That is where I think she navigated between the area or between the spaces of being in the patriarchal situation herself and being in that situation. And she knew that it was not right. And that informed her to make a decision to say, if it wasn't right for her, so therefore it's not right for her granddaughter. So she can have a voice, take consequences of that. And as I say, she really struggled, because it was the first time I saw her being sick in my life when that has happened, when I've left that, because she was really attacked left and right, not physically, but verbally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask? Is it possible for a woman who gets abducted to say no? She doesn't want to partake in this. Can she? Can she move out of that willingly?
Uh, it's it's not easy. It's not the easiest. And as I say, I think I was one of the first people who did that. And that is why, my grandmother was hated and I was hated for that. I lost relationships, and that was in 19, well, when I left, it was 1999. But even now, I still don't talk to some family members because of that. I still don't talk to other people because I did that. I still other people. Well, there's a group of people that are beginning to see it now. Some have come to me and said, "Sibongile, now we understand," but that is 20s, something later,
Yeah.
that they are beginning to understand why that was that. So it's not usual that you could at that time just break away and go. So there are many women that are young women and girls that I know that couldn't escape,
Yeah.
and so they are there. So you're not allowed to walk away. However, now, since 2010, because from 2010, now I was able to, I had more other girls that I have trained in my work. So now it wasn't me, the bad Sibongile, speaking in the
Yeah.
community. Now it was a group of girls, group of young women, and some women who have been in the situation, sharing their experiences of how difficult it is. So now I took a backstage, but we ran several campaigns in the district that were sensitizing the traditional leaders and church leaders and all the community members to say how wrong abduction of girls is, how unconstitutional it is, against human rights, international laws, and all the treaties that we have signed as a country.
Yeah.
And one positive thing that came out of that is that all the traditional leaders that we started to work with that time, today we are best friends. Anything that we stand up to do, they just come along. They are fine. If
Yeah.
they don't understand, they ask questions. But for an example, now, if we talk about the whole issue of plantations, we wouldn't have talked about that in the past. But now, because of that relationship that happened from 2010, when we talk and fight the issue of plantations, I'm not on my own. We are not there as an organization. We are with the traditional leaders
Wow.
that in 2010 didn't want to hear a thing.
Yeah.
So that is
Yes,
how things
and,
have
and
changed over the
in that
time.
unity, there's power. Can I just ask you to reflect a little bit upon your training to be in the position where you are? I understand that you stayed for some time in Ireland, and it would be interesting to hear just a short, or just it doesn't have to be short, but a reflection on your time there and your path towards being a director of this women training program, women leadership and training program.
Yeah, I think it goes back still to my grandmother. When I started doing this work in 1994, when I started to train other girls, now I'm a girl myself, starting to train other girls. My grandmother said to me, "Sibongile, now you've chosen a role, and this role, um, if other girls in the community do certain things, but because of the role you have chosen, you will have to uphold to that role. You have to be better. You have to be outstanding in your role. And you need to lead and in a very different way and in an authentic way." And I think at that time I didn't understand what she really meant. I just listened to that. But when I went to Ireland, I think that was I carried those words from her to say, wherever I am, I must portray myself um, as a woman, of value, but also who's authentic in her leadership. At the same time, I must share my experiences. I must talk about who I am. I think that was the time I began to talk about the whole experiences of abduction. Before then, I wasn't able to talk about that because it didn't feel safe to do so. And I got trained. I did my BA in development studies at Kimage Development Studies Center in Ireland, and I got a fellowship to do that, the Irish fellowship to do that, which was very lucky because otherwise it wouldn't have been possible for me to do that. We didn't have money at home to do those kind of things, or to get to tertiary institution. So when I was there, I I learned to really focus on my local experiences. But at the same time, it was that time that I began to see the issues of gender, that they are bigger than me in Sentokau. They are bigger than this village where I come from. They are bigger than the abduction, you know. And I also learned there that abduction happens in other African countries in a different way as well. But also I was able to link the issues of gender into global, and also, you know, the international structures like the United Nations. I was able to see, oh, what I'm doing on the ground, when I do it well, and it solves the problem, the global problem. It fits into the bigger picture of the world, not just where I am. So that was a very good experience, but also to reflect on my decision and my grandmother's decision. I think at that time I became so proud of myself. I became so proud of my community. I became so proud of my family. You know, I became so proud of my siblings who let me go, because at that time we were facing a very difficult time in my family. And my sister, my older sister, said to me, "Sibongile, you go." And I said, "But how can I go and leave you all, you know, at home with no income?" Because at that time I was earning something in my work. And then they said, "But go." And I said, "What are you going to? How are you going to survive?" And this thing of saying go, I learned that you know, the family can give you permission, you know, and to be. And how proud can you be if you've got a family like that?
Yeah, it's more like a kind of a blessing that they give you, you know, in order to go and to achieve and to, despite the you know, the impact that that void leaves, you know. But fortunately, you are back, and you are supporting your family, and I'm sure they are happy to have you in their lives. Very happy. I want to ask you. Well, first, I want to ask if there's anybody participating in this meeting, if you've got a question on your background, and then I'm going to move on to some of the environmental issues in your area. But if there's anybody that wants to say how's it, and just have a question for Sibongile at this stage, you're welcome to just unmute and pipe up. But if not, then I continue and I ask you, Sibongile, what do you think are the main, and in your experience, I remember you say that things have changed from what you remember as a young girl growing up in a kind of a rural area, and now being an adult, being involved in women leadership training, um, and how has things changed? And if you can mention the two or three, one, if there's just one that you want to talk about, but I want to find out which issues in your area are the main issues affecting the environment, which then obviously affects the community.
Well, there are a number of things, but I think one thing that is that one is the pain of my heart. It's the pain of my community. It's the soil erosion in my community has gone very bad, and with that, the water quality has gone very bad. And also well, of course, when the soil erosion, you know, the food production, you know, levels, you know, are not the same as it used to be. And therefore, meaning poverty in households, you know, have increased. Many people have abandoned the eroded land, and also that means for income, people can no longer plant for sustainable income, which used to be, or even to feed uh, the family for the whole year. Because I grew up in a situation where where we will have fields that will be able to support us for the whole year. You'll know that you have the food. Even if you don't have money, you've got the food, and you've got the water.
Yeah.
And for me, those two things are very problematic because. And then when I remember this time in 1979, I must have been 5 years old. I remember walking across the Mzimkhulu River to the forest. As you know, we're not in a forest region, but we've got patches of forest in our areas because we are mainly a grassland region.
Yeah.
Um, uh, but I remember walking with my grandmother to this place, to this indigenous forest. We've always been there, going there, get a firewood and everything. And this time, I noticed that the forest was being cut down and there were new trees growing. And the trees were in rows and everything. So it didn't make sense because the orientation that is around the forest it gives you another kind of what life is about. But then now when you see things in trees in rows, you are a child. You can't play around those trees to begin with. They are just not trees to handle or to give you that communion, and that there was a lot there. And then early 80s, I saw these trees growing, 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 growing. But then what did that mean? We had no firewood. So instead of walking about 5 or 6 kilometers to that forest, now we needed to go about 10 kilometers or more to get firewood. And even that firewood that we had to travel to get was not the wood that we knew. It was the wattle trees. So this other side, it was the pine trees, closer to home, which is 5 kilometers or so from us. And then away from that, it was wattle trees. And that changed a lot of things because even our cattle, they will go to the forest, for grazing and everything. Now the cattle had less and less of grazing land. And in my thinking, when I look at that time, the soil erosion that I began to see, it happened after the plantations came into the place. And I'm not saying that the plantations were the only reason that we didn't have the grazing, we had soil erosion. But now the cattle were pegged in one place instead of the other place of the forest place where they would be. So the grazing land, shrinked and shrinked and shrinked. And by the time I was 15 or 16, the plantations were even more than that, So it wasn't just a small area, if every place was was full of the plantations.
Sibongile, you remind me of something that happened to me, which is very similar. It was an area where I visited regularly, a grassland area, and then it was planted to pine trees. All of a sudden you found these pine trees appearing in rows, as you say. And then, on successive visits, those trees would grow bigger and bigger. And you found that the grassland plants were thinning out, because as the canopy closed, there wasn't enough light that would penetrate to sustain those grassland plants. And slowly but surely, those grassland plants started to die, And I've always thought, how can we do this? How can we exchange such a diverse area with so many different kinds of plants and animals which live in a grassland or a natural forest? How can we change that for just one kind of plant, a tree? Of course, we do that because we think we make money. But yeah, if you count all those costs like erosion costs and loss of biodiversity and loss of opportunities, obviously it's not, I don't think it's even profitable to have a timber industry. if you should quantify all those costs. So it's very similar to your experience, where I realized that we're doing something which is not, it's not right. It's wrong. And of course, when you destroy a indigenous vegetation type, you destroy like the grassland here or in your area, you destroy all those services that it entails, like the prevention of soil erosion. When it rains, the grassland, it's like a sponge. So it holds the water and releases it slowly to the underground aquifers. And of course, when you destroy that grassland, you lose that service. And now we sit with accelerated soil erosion. I know from the river down here as a young boy, when you go into that river, there's nice clear rocks. You can pick up the rocks. Maybe you can find some crabs inside there. There's fish there. But now if you step into the river and you feel the mud and you feel leaves and you feel, it's completely changed in its nature. And of course, in a society like yours, where people are, that's the nice thing to do with grassland, is to graze your cattle. That's something that makes an African person proud. And now we can't do that anymore, Sorry, Sibongile, I cannot hear you. You must just make sure that you are not muted.
Okay.
I can.
Well, I'm not muted. How is it now?
Now it's better, yeah.
Is it better?
Much better.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think those changes, I must say, at the beginning, although it was confusing, but it was labeled as development, and it's going to give people jobs, and things like that. And I think there were times when I was convinced, well, maybe I didn't know, but when I saw people seasonally, let's say once in 5 or 6 years, they get jobs there. Yeah. So when you're planting, there will be some jobs, and 5, 6, 7 years, however, how many years it takes for pine trees to grow, and then you see people working there. I thought, okay, that's it. But then when I began to see that it's a long time before people can even go and work there in those plantations. But that changed as well. One of a young woman of my age, she was working there in the plantations, and then the tree fell on her and she died instantly. I think that time I started to think, this brings work, yes, maybe, but if it kills the young women of my age, it means I can be killed as well. And I'm still very lucky in my family because I didn't work in the plantations in my life. And I I think for me that is a blessing because I saw my younger sister working. When she finished matric, she went and worked in the plantation to plant. I can mention a number of things that went wrong with her, starting from her health, coughing. No one knew what was wrong with her. She coughed for many, many years after stopping, working in the plantation. She developed a skin problem. For an example, she always have to wear things that are long sleeve and up to, cover cover her body, because if she's exposed for 1 hour or so into the sun, her body will change to be, as black as this t-shirt, as this shirt that I'm having, and no one knows what it's about. We've gone to doctors to try and think about that. And later on, when we began to see, to realize, she was working in the plantation. Now she's got this a coughing that is nonstop. She couldn't even laugh, because once she starts laughing, the coughing will come and it will come nonstop. it was very difficult to experience that. And I think it's over. It's over 30 years now. She has stopped working there. And it has become better, especially the coughing. She can laugh and things like that. But for years, it was a big problem to see her suffering. And now I know, I think, the poison, when people are planting the pine trees, caused that to her. But also, that was just one case, and I still do not know how other people suffered and how other people are suffering. One thing that I just know is that I see people still doing the same work that she did, and I wish they can just stop doing that, just from the health point of view, if not from the environmental view.
Yeah.
But also, what I grew up seeing of 10 years or so was not just the people who were the young women who were killed when they were cutting down the trees, which scared me a lot, but now were the crimes that were happening in the plantations. And crimes in one area where we work, called Shogozi, near High Flats, as towards the south coast. In that area, those plantations, you can anything. People have disappeared in those plantations because they think they are going to cross through the plantation to the next village, which is something that they've been doing. And then they are tempted to do so. And when they do so, they disappear. And no one has, some of them have been recovered, but some have not been recovered. I know one man who has disappeared for 3 years now in the plantation, so no one knows. So that's the kind of thing that people disappear, in the plantation. But also in that area of Shogozi, the car syndicates, that is where they take in the cars and then cut the parts and demolish the car and cut the parts and sell.
Yeah.
And recently, so many girls have been followed, or people have been chasing them, on that road that goes through the plantation. And this is the main road that goes through the plantation. And one of the people that we worked with saw that happening and stopped the taxi. And then they grabbed the girl, and then the people disappeared into the plantation. They grabbed the girl and took her into the taxi. So that is how dangerous the plantations are becoming in our experience. And also, of course, when you look at the Working for Water projects, all those wattle trees that are growing along the streams and rivers, most of those wattle trees and everything, they were planted somewhere, and then they end up on our streams. So it becomes a problem as well. But also, one very interesting thing that happened in September last year, we were working strongly on a water project with the girls, and the girls were during COVID. We had a project to go and do the water testing, through the citizen science program. We had another organization, Ground Truth, that was helping us to train the girls so that they can handle the tools to test water, because we wanted to know how safe is our water, because there was a lot of gender problems related to water because girls walk longer distances to fetch water. So while we were doing that, then we invited our friends, the traditional leaders, to come. And then we said, okay, we've done the research, and these are the findings that we are getting. And these findings are telling us that the streams, most of the streams, especially in the Shogozi area, because it's downstream compared to Sentokau, because Sentokau is closer to the Drakensberg, so it's better.
Yeah.
But for areas in Hlogozi, the water is very bad. And so we had to report this to the stakeholders, and the traditional leaders being one of the key stakeholders. And it came out that the water was decreasing in the areas of Hlogozi. And it wasn't based on the E. coli, meaning it wasn't based on how dirty the water was because of human and livestock contact with the water sources. And now it was based on the plantations are taking so much water into, for that community of Hlogozi. And for us, although we sort of knew that, plantations take a lot of water, but we didn't really have the evidence of how it affects households, how households can tell the water quantity 15, 20 years ago, and how it is progressing, to how it's disappearing a lot now.
Yeah.
And for the traditional leaders, it was very interesting for them to point out at the plantations, not us. We didn't say anything about plantations and things like that. But then they said, if there are many problems that are causing us to have less water, these plantations are the key problem. And I think for me, that was a breakthrough to see the traditional leaders themselves saying that, and pointing out at all the other problems, of course, but seeing that the plantations were not part of their solution.
Yeah.
And when we shared the gender problems, then that is when they said, something must be done about these plantations. We need to talk to the owners of these plantations. And they don't, sometimes they don't even know who owns the plantations. So that was the first task, to say who really owns the plantations in Hlogozi. And they need to engage with those people so that they can look at this situation of water for households, and also to look at the health of people around Hlogozi, especially the people who work in the plantations and the communities that are nearby. And for Hlogozi, it's very bad, because for us, the plantations in Sentokau, the plantations are 5 kilometers away. In Hlogozi, the plantations are 500 meters away from the houses.
Yeah.
So it's very close to people. Yeah.
Well, but that's a great example of some of the sort of mitigation efforts, because that's something that I want to talk to you and ask you about, is what are people doing about this issue, and I think in a way you've already partly answered it, because you are getting together. There are community groups, like you say, testing the water, finding out that there's a problem. Identifying the problem, I think, is a major part of the solution, and then getting the traditional leaders on board, and also acknowledging that the root cause of the problem, why there's less water available, and of course then less dilution capacity, because I think a river system and nature is resilient through the wetlands and the grasslands and the filtering systems in nature. It can be cleaned to a degree, but now we've compromised that through the establishment of these massive monocultures. And in your region, I mean, that's a great example of how people are starting to respond and react, and eventually that will lead to change. I can just say that it's a sort of common knowledge that pine plantations can utilize the equivalent of 450 millimeters rainfall per season. So if you have pines in your area and it rains 450 millimeters, that area where there's pines growing, it's not releasing anything else to the environment. Eucalyptus are worse. They use upwards, I think, of 600 millimeters of rainfall equivalent. And that's a big problem in our area now, is where some of the big companies are or want to change from pine plantations to eucalyptus to cater for this new demand for the production of cellulose. Just with regards to that, in coming to when these plantations were being established, were people, because to me, I often wonder how could people have allowed this, to go. I mean, obviously we need some plantations, we need some timber, we need some paper, we need some toilet paper, we need these things, building timber and stuff. But how could it have been allowed to grow so big, because obviously this is not to cater for a local demand. And if it was to cater for a local demand, surely it would be fine. But a large percentage of this is not even beneficiated appropriately before being exported to fulfill the needs of the North, And the big companies which can value add, for instance, by the production of cellulose, those big companies are normally multinational corporations with shareholders, that's not, or many of them not local. So it's not really local people that's benefiting by the destruction of the land. So I want to know from you, were there a realization in your area that something is happening which is going to have a major impact in the future, or were people just not empowered to make any decisions about land use in the area? I think some of the area, the land in your area is managed under the traditional system, is it not? How could it have been allowed, or was it during apartheid system not possible to really, stop it?
In my view, as I say, in 1979 or 18 or early 80s, it wasn't possible to say anything about that. And also, I think part of the problem was that, for an example, these plantations, although in the Central area, although they are closer to homes, people's houses, by 5 kilometers or so, but they were not land. It was not land owned by the traditional leaders,
Okay.
So that is the difference. However, that same land, even whoever owned it, it it was still useful for local communities. For an example, when the forest was there, the real forest, it was beneficial to people, even though it was on the other side of the river, meaning it belonged to so and so and so and so.
Yeah.
But it was still helpful. And even today, you'll still find cattle crossing the river to the plantation now. And now it is different, because in those plantations there's no grass, there's no life as we know it, and so it remains a problem. So I think in the Central Cow area, it was not land that belonged to the traditional leaders. So in our homes, there are some plantations like wattle trees, but just small pieces of that belong to to Mr. So and things like that. But in Hlogozi, it's different, because in that area, uh, the land, I'm not sure who it belonged to, but the fact that it's so close to people's homes, as 500 meters, from the home. So it just tells that the people or the owners of the land, which could have been the traditional leader at that time in that area, gave the land to whoever owns timber and eucalyptus. And in Hlogozi, it's mainly eucalyptus, it's not timber. There's a lot of timber, and Central Cow, it's timber, it's pine, it's pine and eucalyptus and wattle. But in Hlogozi, it's mainly eucalyptus that is there. And that is why I think the water problem in Hlobozi is more complex than in Sentoka, where there's some pine, you know. So those are the differences. So, but in terms of who gave the land, I would say the system, the apartheid system, wouldn't have allowed people to say no. You know, it would have been just seen as development of the area.
But I think,
And there were sorry.
yeah,
Hello?
I was just,
Can you hear me?
I can hear you well. Thanks, Sibongile. I was just also reflecting on the fact that, I mean, this kind of development is happening everywhere. It's not just in South Africa, of course. It's all over Southern Africa. It's all over Africa. It's all over South America. It's all over Europe. You know, if you think about a country like Sweden, they used to have lots and lots and lots of forests. I think they have like 1% of their original forest left. You know, I was once in Vancouver in Canada, and I saw opposite the place where we were having a kind of a conference, I saw they were clear cutting. It was like a kind of an island, and there was a forest on that island, and they were just clear cutting huge blocks of forest. And I think, yeah, how can this be allowed? You know, and of course it's because people think it's some kind of development. That makes me so cross when planting timber plantations are promoted amongst rural people as some form of rural development. You know, instead of promoting what rural people know. It's growing a diverse array of produce and having some cattle and some goats and some chickens and some pigs, and in that diversity there's some kind of resilience, you know.
Yes, yeah. Well, I think Philip, you are right. You know, over the years now, I think maybe 5 or more years, we've begun to ask ourselves, you know, what life would have been if we had all this grazing land that we had, you know, before the plantations. How life would have progressed for household, for people, and for the dignity of the household. You know, you can be very poor in these rural areas in our homes, but if you've got 5 cattle, you've got 10 goats, you are a person, you know, and you are considered as such. And how do you begin to feel that your dignity is there if you've got no cow, no goat, and no money, you know, because there are no jobs, you know, anymore.
No.
And there's no place for you to raise these, you know, your goats and your cattle. So I think that is one thing that many people now are beginning to say, especially the people that we work with, you know, to say, protect the least that is still left. You know, don't let it go. Yeah. Don't plant foreign things, especially the things that are like the eucalyptus. You know, try your agroecology. Try things that are going to restore the soil. What kind of trees we can put in those dongas, you know, yeah, as we go forward. So those are the kinds of things that we're beginning to dialogue about. But also there's something that I forgot to mention. The stock theft. It's such a big problem. You know, the stock theft that is happening in you know, and then get to you know, the cattle get, you know, they get killed, and then in the same plantations, you know. And now you cannot just enter the plantation, you know, to look for your lost cattle, because you know, in the past you could do that, but now you can't, because you get those people who will be, you know, who will, you know, cut you just as they are cutting you your cattle in the plantation. Sure, so even if now you're trying to have the cattle like in my home, my uncle always, he doesn't lose like two cows when the stealing is happening. He will lose something like 8 or 10 cattle. He's lost 20 goats, at a go, and
Yeah.
everything goes into those plantations. And there are people who are, outside those plantations who are looking after, really watching who's getting into the plantation. And if you dare to get into the plantation, and especially if you, let's say, you are unarmed, meaning you are not in a group, and you don't have guns and things like that, so you will be attacked before you even get into the plantation to look for your cattle. And if you are a woman, so this is how it gets to the women and girls. If you are a woman who's got those 5 or 10 cattle or goats or whatever, if they are lost for you, you cannot even go there
Yeah.
because you can't even attempt that. So, and that is what we've seen being the greatest crime. It's the girls and women and people disappearing in the plantations, the livestock being taken into the plantations and then cut there and taken into mainly Durban and Pietermaritzburg. Those are the two places where they take the meat to, and then the car syndicates. So we're facing these three crimes in the areas, and we know that all of them happen because the plantations, are just the best place for them to happen.
Yeah, they seem to they offer some kind of refuge because you can hide in them. In the past, when it was open grasslands, you can see for kilometers on end, and you can travel there feeling safe. You can see what's going on around you. But now, and even in our area, when you travel around and you think how it must have been in the past, driving in these mountains, there must have been beautiful views, open vistas where you can see for tens or even hundreds of kilometers. And of course, when the plantations grow and then all the roads, they become monotonous. They all look the same. It's another problem. And of course, I think it's great what you're saying, that people are realizing that the little bit that's left, that's natural, we must safeguard jealously. We must look after it and make sure that it doesn't get transformed and destroyed to more monoculture. But I also believe that there must be a change in the industry itself, that we must move away from monoculture plantations. We must move towards diversifying. We must look at using indigenous timber species. For sure, it's possible. We must look at diversifying in the understory, making sure that people can again graze their goats in a more of a forest system, because again, in that diversity, there must be some form of resilience. Your reflections on that?
Yeah, I think definitely I will agree with you on that. And as much as I say, people are beginning to talk about this, I must say, when you're a smaller organization like WLTP and you work with women and you've got traditional leaders on your side, it's becoming better. However, the people who will have influence on such issues, well, beside that, they are crooks, but they will have the government keys somehow, you know. They're either politicians and things like that to get in, permissions and things like that to plant the plantations. So I think, even though I think it's great that the traditional leaders are now on board in our areas, but we need more traditional leaders who are not going to be twisted by politicians and companies, of the key work that we need to emphasize, focus on going forward. And it is possible. I can see that it is possible. Like there's one a traditional leader. He is so good. When it comes to the water, the water systems in his area. You know, he understands the wetlands so well. And I think because he has got some education as well, it makes him, when you talk to him, you talk sense, but also he's able to stick to his word. And also because he is a key person in Contralesa, the Council of Traditional Leaders in South Africa. He's able to stand up in those meetings and say, in this area, in our area, we focusing on ecotourism, we protecting our plantations and things like that. So people like that, they give us hope that things will come all right. How and nothing will happen in his area. So we are sorted with him. We know that, you know,
Yeah.
nothing will come in his area. However, with other chiefs, we still want to continue, you know, advocating for no plantations, but at the same time giving them alternatives. What can you do? You know, what can be done? Like, for an example, now we are busy writing a proposal for diversity work. They want to focus on water. They want to focus on endangered species like the southern brown hornbill and the habitat for southern brown hornbill. So we're busy doing that with them, and we're hoping that if we get that funding, it will make them to see the benefits, you know, of working in the water and protecting some species and their habitat. And but I think it also depends a lot on 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 saying, as WTP, can we give them alternative? Can we lead them to sources of funding that can help them to do biodiversity work instead of allowing plantations and things like that to happen in their area. So
Yeah.
there is hope, and I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful.
That's yeah, and obviously that all that hope depends upon organizations like yours and people like you to keep on, you know, advocating, people keep on raising the awareness, because if you know, if you people can be forgiven for making mistakes if they didn't know that it was a mistake, you know. But once people know which mistakes can be made and they still don't avoid it, that is when it's problematic, you know. So I'm also hopeful, because people like yourselves and you have hope. So I just want to ask if there's anybody that's in this chat. There's just a handful of people. Brian, I see you here. Mariette, Robbie. If any of you have got a comment or a question for Sibongile, you are more than welcome to just quickly ask, unmute, and come forward.
Good evening, everybody.
Hey, hello, Robs.
Sibongile, thank you very much for your talk. It's been really interesting, and I want to commend you on what you're doing in your community, and clearly for the passion that you have for women's rights and for environmental rights and for people's rights within that area. The question I want to ask is, you have this women leadership training program, and in your community, I assume you focus on education for the girls growing up, to make sure that they get proper education, that they're well informed on what's going on around them. I wanted to know, are there similar programs for boys in the community? Because as you mentioned, you know, for a healthy community, you know, it requires all members, and we currently still live in a patriarchal society to a large extent. Hopefully that's changing, I think, as we get more educated moving forward. But what do you think will be required going into the future for women and for men, of course, to kind of create a healthy society, you know, where the people that are making decisions are well informed, are trustworthy? What will it take for South Africa and for South African rural communities to really make that change and the change that's made is actually seen in our communities and in our society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robbie. I will start with the last question. What I believe, at least for me and for us, as the key to really reach that level of informed communities working together and creating the common goal, let's say the community that they want to see. For me, it is about, how do I put this? It's basically about, taking away this idea that as rural people, you are inferior, or as Black people, you are inferior. Understanding the treasures, that have been handed over to us over, the period of time, generations and generations, and also go into the wells, we call it this, the wells, the sources, I don't know how to call it, but to go to who we are really before we were told we were less of something. What is it that sustained us better, in the past? What knowledge do we carry that we have packed? I refuse to think that knowledge dies. I think why, as long as you're still alive, you pack the knowledge because you think the new knowledge is better. However, as you walk in your path, you realize, whatever I'm chasing, I'm not finding it. And I still go back to what I know worked, and I go back to that and I find it working. And I'll give an example of that. A specific example during COVID-19. Although we've been promoting agroecology in our communities, for many years, but how many people got into agroecology during COVID-19? Because that was one of the main coping mechanism that they knew. So they got to remember what worked well. So for me, for communities to progress to the common future they want, is to go to what you have packed, voluntarily or not voluntarily, forced or not forced. Go to that, take that, look at that, and of course put it together with the science today. What is wrong with what I knew? Nothing wrong. Nothing is wrong. And then if it's supported by both, but by what you know and the science that is in front of you, then use that. So for me, I think communities have to balance that. But how do you balance that? Is to believe, remember and believe what what you knew and what has sustained you in the past, and know that it is still valid knowledge. So that for me, it's a key thing, and I've seen it working in so many ways. And going into the question of boys, we have got a boys group that we work with. We've started this boys group. It's called the Heralds. In Zulu, we call it Inhlabamkhosi. They do the similar themes with them, and then the girls do the same themes and modules on their own. And then they've got times to come together and dialogue and create things together. This group is, although struggling a little bit with funding, because I think funding for boys and young men are not as popular as for girls, and that is why we wanted this group to mentor it, or to walk along with them, so that, because they feed into our agenda, we feed into their agenda. And yes, I agree, Fabio, sorry, Robio, that when that happens, we have seen positive changes. If I can just give an example, all the young men and let me say the boys and young men that we've worked with, at least in the past 5 years, when you follow their story and their portfolios, because we sometimes ask for their portfolios and things like that, and sharing sessions, and we watch them in the community, their behavior is different. They respect girls, they respect themselves, they create new cultures where abduction for marriages is no longer acceptable. They support us in our campaigns. But but especially for me, they haven't been harassing girls. They don't beat girls. They don't abduct girls for marriages and things like that. And so for me, I believe what you are saying, that when boys as well are involved and empowered to reimagine um, how to be without the patriarchal society or patriarchal men that oppress them, the society becomes better. We really rely so much on those kind of boys and young men. For an example, if we have to go for things that have to happen in the few forests where we are, or for water testing and things like that, those young men, they come with us. Those boys, they come, they become part of the whole process. They are not many, but at least we can rely on them. So that is what it's going to take. It's to give the boys as well the freedom to redefine what it means to be a boy, and also to critique the patriarchy, because if I can tell you how patriarchy oppresses boys, you would be shocked to understand the stories that we've come across of boys being scandalized, being done so terrible things, in the name of being a man, in the name of you need to know this better, so that when it comes to you, you need to know how to abduct better, you need to know how to do this. So boys as well are oppressed in their own way by patriarchy. So therefore, for the future, they have to be freed from that same patriarchy as well. And they have to have that space to redefine. Yeah.
Thanks. Robbie, you want to follow up on that?
I just want to say thank you, and thank you for your insight, and all of the best of your work going forward.
Thanks, Robert, for your input. Anybody else that wants to just input something before we move towards a kind of a closure? Then I just want to also reflect a little bit on what you said in terms of we must think about our knowledge of the past. Traditional knowledge systems, culture, incredibly important. But the dilemma is that a lot of that, I think, is closely linked to nature and natural systems and animals and plants and abundance of diversity. And that is why it is so necessary to move towards getting that back, so that we can reclaim our cultures. If I may, Sibongile, just a final question from me. You said you have hope, and I just want to ask you to reflect briefly on your hope for our country generally. Race relations, we're a multicultural country. How do you think things are improving? Just briefly, if you can say how you feel about our country generally, race relations. Yeah.
Well, I will start with the issue of race. It's very tricky because it's always linked to the causes of inequity, and issues like that. And I think it's so true. We cannot run away from that. However, what I have, for many years now, what I have discovered is that if you have to reimagine the future, yes, you have to think of the history and you have to tackle that. However, there are things that you cannot win. So look at what you can win. And there are some obstacles, that are of the past. Think about, is there anything really I can do about these obstacles, And if your answer is no, duck those obstacles, because then you'll be stagnant if you push, into those obstacles.
Yeah.
My principle is or how I see the country moving forward. If the obstacles are too difficult, duck them and look for new innovations, on how to build the future, not forgetting the past, but knowing that you can no longer win that damage and pain of the past. So for me, that works well. At the same time, if you have to move forward as the country, I love the philosophy of Ubuntu, because Ubuntu in itself, it doesn't have the race, in itself. It doesn't know race. So if Ubuntu is what guides the African person, and African person for me, it's not black and white. African person is someone who believes in Ubuntu and lives according to those principles. So therefore, in many cases, when I'm confronted with issues of race and some people saying, are you colorblind and things like that? No, I say, no, I'm not colorblind. I cannot be. But I know that I believe in Ubuntu. And in the whole text of Ubuntu, race is just not mentioned. And not mentioned because maybe it didn't exist, but because race will not be a life-giving factor in Ubuntu. It will be a life-threatening factor in Ubuntu. So therefore, if I choose Ubuntu, I need to choose it in totality. And I cannot choose it and then on the other side, and I say, okay, but you are white, If you believe in what I believe in, so, well, that kind of thing. And if you can see how we can bring about equity in the future, then let it be. So that for me is the hope that I have. And another hope that I have, I think the grassroots is the only thing somehow that's going to sustain and inform us on how to be. I don't believe in politicians. I know that politics are important, but I've seen the strength and the resilience, in grassroots movements and people. They may not conquer the whole thing of capitalism as we know it, but they provide an alternative that works for them. If you think of the movements in South America, if you think of the indigenous people or the Maori people in the Atlantic, in the Australasia and things like that, if you think of what they coming into to teach us, about how to be, for me, those kind of initiatives, they show me that no matter how oppressed the people are or have been, and as I say, for me, then Ubuntu gives something to hold on and nicely and say, because I believe in this, so the future, the future, ahead lives, and things like that.
Yeah.
And sometimes people think that, how can you say that as a person who fights for justice and equity? And I said, yes, equity is something that I want to see, is something that I want us to create, but I cannot be stopped by the pain that I'm carrying, or that we are carrying, to see the future that lies ahead of us. Yeah.
Sure. Well, Sibongile, I thank you again, and we're going to. This is being recorded, so it will be up on YouTube. I also want to ask people who watch it on YouTube, the YouTube GeaSphere Africa channel. I'll send the links out, but please subscribe to the video, then you'll get updates on future videos. Is there anybody that wants to just say something before we close this interview session or meeting? Then I want to thank all the participants, everybody who came here and listened, and I want to thank you, especially Sibongile, for giving up your time in the mid-evening, getting to late evening. Thank you very much for your dedication, your passion, your very, very valuable work, and I'm sure we're going to meet again in the future, and I look forward to that. So thank you very much, and good night to everybody.